I want to talk about bass lines. Obviously, being a bass player, bass lines is our main gig on the bandstand. Soloing is later. Our main job is to support everybody else in the band and make them sound good. And the way you make them sound good is making great bass lines. And to make a great bass line, you need to make it feel like you're breathing. Just like the drummer is the heartbeat of the band, the bass is the lungs, it's the breath of the band. So when you make a bass line, you have to make it move, kind of show where you're going to the next chord and make it breathe that way. And I'll give you an example on a jazz standard called Alone Together. In the beginning, there's a lot of 2/5s in minor, D minor, E minor, flat 5 to A7. And if you're just playing completely square, it won't breathe, it won't go anywhere. It'll just be. That doesn't really go anywhere. You can't feel where it's going harmonically or time-wise. So the way you make it breathe is play notes around it. You can alternate bass notes that shows where you're going. So it could be. You see what I'm saying? You can kind of hear where you're supposed to go in the chord. It doesn't come as a complete surprise. And that's what I mean by make the bass line breathe. And when you make the bass line breathe, you also make it more melodic in a way. And if you check out some of the great bass players that were masters of composing bass line, like Paul Chambers or Ray Brown, they're like compositions in themselves. You don't even have to hear the piano. You know where the chords are going. That's making a bass line breathe. And it's the same tradition that makes James Jamerson such a famous bass player too in terms of bass lines. So I'm going to give you an example with Alone Together, which is a jazz standard, and it's got a bunch of 2/5s in D minor. So the 2/5s are D minor to E minor, flat 5 to A7. If you play it really squarely, you can't feel where the song is going. So if I played the first A section that way, I would, without like trying to make it breathe, it would sound like this. That doesn't really show where the song is going, where it's breathing, where you're going to. So now I'm going to try to stay in 2-beat and try to pick some notes that kind of show where we're going, where the next chord is coming. So I'm going to stay in 2-beat and show you that on an A section as well. So first D minor. I could do it again. So I hope you can see that by picking some notes that shows where you're going harmonically, automatically make it more melodic and also makes it breathe and show you where the music is going, which makes it a lot more comfortable for the people you're comping behind, so they don't have to hammer out so many chords, and gives them more freedom. So that benefits everybody in the band. Now, so that's 2-beat, but when you make a bass line in jazz, obviously, at one point, you want to go to 4-beat. But again, you shouldn't just dish out a bunch of notes right away. When you start your 2-beat, start simple, but make it breathe. And the same goes when you move to 4-beat, play on every quarter note. You don't have to play a new note every time the beat hits. You can stay kind of in a double 2 feel. And what I mean by that is, let me play the last A section for the B section 2 feel, and when I go to the B section, I'll start walking, but I'll do it with 2 notes per bar. So I still have ways to go. So here's the last A section. D minor, E minor 7 flat 5, D7, on G minor, B minor, E, F major, B section. And that way it makes it breathe all the time. Make the music breathe, make your bass line breathe and show where we're going chord-wise. And take your time. Don't immediately go into... That'll be in like the 7th chorus of the solo. You got plenty ways to go. So stay slow, build it slowly and make it breathe. That's your main focus. Your main focus is to support everybody else in the band, and that's by building this house of bass lines really slow. Now I want to talk to you about the choice of notes. We started out talking about making the bass line breathe and picking some notes to show where the chords is going. And I know some people might say that I jumped the gun a little bit, but for me, it's more important to make your bass line breathe and evolve than it is to pick the correct note. With that said, of course, there are some notes you should concentrate on in the beginning while you're building this house of bass lines. And as a rule of thumb, the most important notes are the chords, the chord tones of the notes. So if we're in Alone Together, which is D minor to E minor flat 5 to A7, it would be like... So the first is D minor, I play D for the first 2 beats, F, which is the minor third of the D minor, and then it goes to E minor flat 5. Obviously the root, you should always play the root first. And then I play the flat 5 to get to the A. So that is actually a chord note. That's the flat 5 of the E minor flat 5 going to the A7. And since it's on B3, it's an important beat. It should be the root. So always the beat 1, 3 are important beats because that's usually where the chord changes. And when a new chord gets played, you always want to play the root unless you want to do alternate bass notes, which we'll get into later. So again, D minor, D minor. I'm still in D minor, I play the 3rd, root, 5th, minor 5th, A7, root. And then the same thing goes when you go walking. It's the same thing. You'll have more notes to play if you want to, but I could do the same thing and still do it in walking. Right? Another thing I would like to talk about is also the rhythmic aspect of your bass line. I know it's really cool when you listen to like Ron Carter or Paul Chambers, and when they play, sometimes they play really straight, and sometimes they play. So you can do it rhythmically interesting, but do not make it rhythmically interesting within yourself, because never forget that you play with everybody else. What you are playing when you play a bass line, you are playing with the drummer, with the soloist, with the piano player, whoever is there. So if you are more active in your bass line, you take away space from the other musicians, because there's only so much space you have available on the bandstand to fill out notes. So if you are super active in your bass playing, you restrict the drummer, you restrict the piano player, you restrict everybody. So just be aware of that. So if you play a bass line, then all of this action like leaves no space. The drummer can just play ging, 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 ging. And that's not a whole lot of fun if somebody's just becoming like a rhythm slave. So be aware of it. Follow the music. Follow the flow of the music. If the drummer leaves you space, then you can fill some up. But if the drummer is playing, then maybe you should just hold it down the fort and let the drummer do all the fun. And then if you know the drummer really well, then you could start to do it together. But the rule of thumb is the more active you play a bass line, the less space you leave for everybody else. And never forget that the music is not the notes, it's what happens in between them. Another way you can vary your bass lines and your bass comping when you play with other people is making alternate bass notes. And to me, the master of this is Ron Carter. Ron Carter, to me, is like the godfather of alternate bass notes and pedal points and stuff like that. But what's really cool about alternate bass notes and what's really cool about playing the bass, whatever genre you're in, is you can change the chord by just changing your bass note. So, for example, we're still playing Alone Together, which is in D minor. So D minor is here. That's D minor. And obviously, a D in the bass, that's fine. But if you play a G in the bass, then this chord but now I'll play a G in the bass. It's like the same chord, you just play a G in the bass, all of a sudden it's no longer a D minor, it's a G7. It could be bluesy that you all of a sudden play the 4 in the bass note of a minor. So that could be a lot of fun if you hear it. Don't do it just to do it. Do it if it comes naturally out of the music or you can feel there's an opening to do this. Because the soloist might be still being D minor doing some stuff there, and then you don't want to stick in a note that doesn't fit what the soloist is doing, for example. But it can be cool. So that's for an example of another bass note. And again, if we're in D minor, you could also put in an A pedal, which is the dominant point. So instead of, we're in the tune right here, but if you play an A pedal in the bottom, then you're kind of like making the music kind of like anticipating something. And you're not changing anything, you're changing the flavor, the color of the chord by just pedaling through. And the A pedal works on a D minor. You could put an A in a D minor, and on a E minor flat 5, yeah, you can put an A in the bottom because it goes to the A7. So put an A in there to create some tension, but the tension needs to get released. You can't just create tension and not release it musically. So either you can release it back home to the D minor, or if you feel adventurous, you can go to the G7 as we just talked about. So another thing you should be aware of when you build your bass line, that is the concept of form. Any tune has a form. Even if it's just one chord, you still play a form. And a form is usually 4 bars, 8 bars, and then something else. But what's interesting about form is it's chapters. If you look at it as chapters in a book, then you got to make every chapter count. If you have a song that's an AABA form, you don't want to do exactly the same thing in the 2 first A section and exactly the same thing and approach on the B section and exactly the same approach in the A section again. Because that would be kind of reading a book and you read chapter 1 and you reach chapter 2 and all it says in chapter 2 is read chapter 1 again. That doesn't happen. So you got to create a baseline, a world on its own that kind of tells you, all right, this is chapter 1 and this is chapter 2 and this is chapter 3, just like a book. Like if you read a good book that is written really well, you don't have to know that this is chapter 1 or chapter 2. You can feel about what's happening. And with that said, that doesn't mean that you have to go reinvent the wheel on every chapter, but you should make a difference. Don't turn on the autopilot. Just make everything evolve, make everything count, and think about the form as chapters in a book. All right, I'm going to try to summarize what we talked about in this lesson about making the bass line breathe, how to make it evolve and show where it's going, and also building the bass line slowly. First doing 2 beats, and then doing what I call a 2-beat walking line where you play 2 beats on every note. And I'm also going to try to show you about alternate bass lines and pedal points. So here goes. take any space that's not available to me. Always show where the chord is going. And now a pedal point. And you got to release the tension. I'm back. Different approach on the second A. I'm not copying myself. And then now a full-fledged walking bass line. Alternate bass note. All of a sudden is a G7. Last chapter, we're winding down. All of a sudden, the D minor becomes a G7.